Hello crafty people, it's Sharon here again, and I'm back with one of my quick lessons in paper crafting, and this time we're going to talk about the subject of fussy cutting, which I know is something that some people find very difficult. So I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks of how I fussy cut and hope that these will help you too. So for the purpose of today's demonstration, I'm going to use this lovely alpaca and cut him or her out. If you're interested in this stamp, I'll just bring in the details for you. It's a Tracy Hay stamp. It's an A5 stamp set called Alpaca My Halo, and you can see it's got lovely alpacas all over it, and you might recognise these characters as I've done a colouring video with this very same character on one of my previous videos using alcohol markers. But that's not for today. We're going to concentrate on the cutting out aspect of things and a few little extra tips and tricks that you might enjoy as well. So I have stamped my alpaca onto my card. Now if you know you're going to be cutting out, obviously you need to use the right kind of card for whatever colouring or crafting you're going to do. But I would recommend that you try to go for a card that's slightly thinner and more flexible if you're going to cut your character out. It just makes it a lot easier. So a 300 GSM piece of card is not going to bend and flex so well and may tear around the edges a little bit. You have to fight against it. This is slightly lighter weight. You can also, if you're an alcohol colorist, you can use Nina card, which is slightly lighter. Also, I find that watercolor card, although it's thicker, it is easy to cut. So watercolor card is quite forgiving as well because it has fibers in it that will actually break away in a nice way for you. My second tip is, you can see that I've stamped this on a piece of card. It's quite a lot bigger than my image. I don't want to be fighting with all this card around the edge. So the first thing I like to do is just roughly cut around my image just to make it a bit more smaller and manageable, but at the same time to give me something to hold on to when I'm cutting. Also, a good tip for cutting out images is when they go onto their final card, you want them to stand out from your card a little bit, and the way to do this is to kind of give them a little halo around the edge. And to do that, what we're actually going to do is not cut directly on the line. We're just going to give a millimetre or so gap around the edge, and that also is quite forgiving in terms of giving us a little bit of wiggle room, shall we say. Now, if we look closely at this stamp, you can see that I've got little splatters around the edge. I'm not going to cut those out. They wouldn't look right. So I'm going to ignore those for the purpose of this, this cutting session. But I will show you a trick how to incorporate those extra little flourishes onto your final piece if that's what you want to do. So let's get to cutting. I've got a smallish pair of scissors with a pointy edge and they're nice and sharp blades. Mine are Fiskars. It's whatever you prefer really. Some people actually like to do this with a large pair of scissors. For me that doesn't work. So these are just normal small crafting scissors. So I'm going to find a point where I feel like I can start and get a bit of a flow, and usually that's sort of near the bottom or on a straightish edge. And what I'm going to do is start from the outside and just come in about 1.5 millimetres away, and I'm going to follow the curve of the stamp. But what I'm actually doing is I'm trying to move my card rather than my scissors, and what that does, it helps to stop the card from tearing or ripping. If I go a little bit wrong, I can lift up my scissors and just reposition them. Now this doesn't have to be an exact border all the way around. If once you've cut out the whole thing, it really won't notice if some areas are a little bit thicker and some are thinner, but you can adjust them. Now I'm at to the corner of my image. I'm just going to go a little way beyond to give me some wiggle room and then come back and make my turn. And the key to this all is really just to take your time. Fussy cutting is not something you do in a hurry, so you need to be relaxed and in the right frame of mind for fussy cutting. So again, I'm moving my card around and trying as much as possible to do the movement with my card rather than my scissors. Coming around again, and I'm just going to keep following. There we go. I'm hoping that this is staying in focus. It's not easy when you're trying to do something up close, but hopefully you get the idea. Now, can you see I'm starting to fight now with my extra bits of card, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to veer off to the side and cut off my excess card. And that gives me a little bit more wiggle room to start again. And I'm just going to go back where I left off. Now, depending if you're left or right-handed, you might go clockwise or anti-clockwise. I'm left-handed, so I'm preferring to go anti-clockwise. Now, I just went a bit off track there, but that's okay, because what we can do is once we've finished cutting, we can go back and correct anything that we feel looks a bit out of place. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a little bit of an error here so that you can see. There we go. And I'm going to carry on with my cutting. Now, another point to mention, and this is particularly good if you're cutting flowers, is to cut into pointed areas. So we'll come to that later. If you want to see how that works, stick with me and I'll do another little cut of a flower so that you can see that in action too. Meanwhile, I've nearly finished cutting around. I hope I didn't go too much off screen now. I got a bit carried away. There we go, and I finished cutting out my image. Now, if I just find a bit of coloured card to put that up against so that you can see. Hopefully you can see that although it's not perfect, once you look at it in its entirety, it doesn't matter too much if this little bit is a bit deeper than that little bit. You're just looking at the overall picture. However, if you have any edges that you think are not quite right, for example this bit up here where I've kind of gone off track, you can go back in and just trim them up so that they look how you want them to look. So if you've got any pointy corners that you don't like the look of, you can just go and trim them. Any rough edges, just give a little snip, and that's the beauty of having lovely sharp scissors and small scissors. So there we go, I've just tidied that up and we have our lovely cute animal cut out ready. Now, the next thing I'd be doing probably is applying him to a card. So here's one that I've prepared. I've done a little bit of inking. I've got my sentiment ready and I'm going to put him on here like this. But I'm missing those lovely little splatters that Tracy puts in her artwork. And so to get this splatter effect, I'm going to go back to my original stamp. Just grab my stamping platform, and what I'm going to do, sorry, I've just got to adjust a little bit. I couldn't get the lid open on my platform. There we go. I'm going to put my bit of card on here, and I'm actually going to stamp that original image directly onto my piece of card where I want it to be. So on this occasion I happen to have a Memento ink pad because I happen to be colouring with alcohol pens. So I'm going to tap my ink pad onto my image, and I'm inking the whole image and press it down to stamp. And there you can see now I've got my whole image with my little splatters on the edge. I can apply my finished cutout item, which eventually will be coloured, and when I stick it down, I'm going to have those little splatters around the edge without having to worry about colouring them in, cutting them out. So that's a little trick for you. Let's stick this down so you can see the full effect. Give this a quick stick. And I'm going to stick it directly over the top of my image underneath. And there we have our completed image, which you probably will have coloured, with my splatters around the edge and a beautiful little halo to help him or her stick out from my background. So that's part one. Now let's talk about cutting out things with pointy areas, such as cutting into petals on flowers. So my next tip is going to be talking about cutting directly on the line and also dealing with difficult to tackle areas where you've got points going into the centre of your design, and that's particularly the case with flowers. So here's a lovely flower with all of those difficult little nitty-gritty bits in that we're going to tackle next. And this time I'm not going to cut with a border. I'm going to cut directly on the edge of the line so that we can really get into the detail of these pointy areas. And if you look around the edge, you can even see there's tiny little jagged areas there. So me being me, this isn't for everybody. When I cut on the line, I tend to cut in a clockwise direction. That's just me. The key to fussy cutting is to find the way that's comfortable for you. So I'm going to again start from my bottom area and find my easiest route to get started, and I'm turning my card once again, and all of a sudden I find myself upon a tricky area. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut around that, just touching the edges of the points of those petals as far as possible till I get to a nice straight area again. And then I'm going to go back to my plan. Now as I reach the top here, I've got a wobbly area, so I'm going to again just cut around the top. Now you could cut those off completely if you want to, it's really up to you, but I'm just cutting roughly around the edge. And I'm back to a smooth petal area. I'm going to cut straight onto that, so you can see there I've cut straight on the line. And then as I get down to these more difficult areas, I'm actually going to cut a line across them. And then finally I'm going to cut the rest of my stalk. So I'm just going to take the easiest route for me with the way my hand's going, and I'm cutting from the bottom and just joining up to the area where I cut before. So now if you look, we've got a half cut out flower, but we've left lots of areas, and if you look closely, each individual one, everyone's like a little triangle with the point at the top. And the key to cutting out these kind of things is to actually cut into the triangle from the base to the top. So it's up to you where you start. I'm going to start on this big one in the middle, and then I'm going to start from one corner, cut to the point, then turn my card and cut up to the point. And then I can remove my little bit of card. And this applies whether you're dealing with a tiny little piece like this area here. You just find that triangle and cut into it. So I've taken out the tiniest little notch just there. I'm going to go and do the same with this one. Turning my card any which way that makes it comfortable for me. And I'm just going to pull out my little piece of card. There we go. So if I move over this way, I'm going to do the same again and pull it away. And if you don't quite cut up to the notch on the first attempt, just go in a little bit more with your scissors until you find that. You'll feel it almost sort of click. Now this one is more squarish, so I've cut in from the side here and I'm just going to finish it off. There's no rule saying you've got to do them in order. You do them in a way that works for you. So I didn't quite manage to match my corner with my cutting, so I'm just going to go up a little bit more and it falls away. And we just carry on like that. Gently pulling away each segment. And you can make this into quite a mindful exercise if you feel that way. Because it does take a few minutes. Now let's just flip around to the top here where I've got all these little jagged edges. Again, I could cut them away completely and stamp the main image onto my main card, just like I showed you on my previous example, so that I can get those little fuzzy edges. Or once again, I can look for those little triangles that I'm creating and just start snipping away. So that's what I'm doing. I'm basically looking at it, eyeballing and seeing, oh, there's a little triangle there. And I'm cutting that triangle away from base to point. So hopefully you can start to see that I'm cutting away all those tiny little details. Now if you try to do that in a roundabout fashion, wiggling your card in and out, it would be very hard to achieve that. So I'm just doing all the same thing all the way around. So I'm just going to pause while I finish cutting this out and then you can see the final result. So here we have my finished cut out flower. All of my little fiddly bits are cut out, all of my petals are cut out, and the trick to this is don't be too hard on yourself if it's not perfect. When you add this onto a card, nobody's going to be looking at the individual cutting lines, they're just going to look at the whole picture. But you have got a beautifully cut out flower there, and underneath here's all my little snippings where I've been making those tiny little triangles. So that's the key to cutting pointy edges in things like flowers and petals. And now I'm going to move on to one final thing before I leave you, and that is going to be cutting out this lovely bee. And really with this bee, can you see they've got tiny little legs here and little antenna and all sorts of things. Now if I try to cut these legs out, that is going to be a total nightmare. They're going to be flimsy, they're going to break, and there's a strong chance that I'm just going to cut them off altogether. So actually that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to ignore all of these fiddly areas and I'm just going to cut the main part of the image. So once again I'm going to cut off my excess, get rid of that. And we're going to start our cutting process once again. I'm cutting on the line for this one. So again, I'm going to go clockwise this time. And I'm going to cut round the main image of the bee's body and his wings, moving my card as I go. And I'm going to ignore the antenna and any other little fiddly bits that are there on the outside. And this makes the process much easier for me, because if you ignore all of that extra, the actual body of this bee is quite easy to cut out. It's not fiddly like the flower was, it's a fairly straightforward shape. And I'm just giving that feeling of the furry little bits on the edge by just wiggling my scissors as I go around, so I haven't got a perfectly curved line. I'm going to wiggle in and out a bit, not worrying too much about following those precise lines, but at least giving the feel of the wiggles. So I'll just finish cutting that, and you'll see that's taken me, well, less than a minute to cut that out. And we have our bee looking a little bit naked at the moment because he's lost his legs and his antenna and everything. But we're going to correct that when we apply it to our finished piece of card. So I'm back with my stamping platform. I have my little bee, which has no legs or antenna, but I want to make sure that when I apply him to my finished card, which is going to be this piece of card here for this demo, I want him to have his legs and everything that he started out with. So again, I'm going to go back to that technique I showed you right at the beginning in my first demonstration, take my original stamp and stamp him on with my ink of choice. So in this case I'm using a Memento because I've been using alcohol pens to colour, or I will be, and I'm going to stamp him down where I want him to be on my piece of card, and this will be the card that will eventually get matted and layered onto my final piece. Now I've stamped him, and as you can see the middle of him didn't come out too well, but that's not a problem because we're not going to be able to see that in the end. What I do want to make sure is okay is the legs and antenna etc. that I've already got, that I want to see. So those have come out fine, and that means I can now go ahead and colour my extra little pieces. Now I'm just doing this I haven't got the right pen for this really, but you get the idea. I can add that in and colour those directly onto the card, or I could use a pencil or whatever it is that I want to use. So now those legs, antenna etc. are all coloured in, and I'm ready to stick my final piece over the top, and you would never know that I hadn't cut those out in the first place. So let's do that. Imagine I've actually coloured my little bee. And we'll just stick him in place directly over my base stamp, and that little area in the middle has been covered over. And actually this works really well because this piece of card is slightly raised and the legs are underneath, which gives that 3D image. So those are my examples of fussy cutting for you today. I hope that that's helped you. Let's just do a quick recap. So we have our cutting with a border and incorporating little extra splashes and splotches on your main card. We have cutting out a fiddly image where we've got lots of points that we need to get into, and we're practicing the triangle technique of cutting in from the edge of the triangle up to the point. And that was borderless cutting. And finally we have another example of borderless cutting where we've got fiddly items such as legs and antenna, or could be tendrils on a flower, and how we can get around incorporating those onto our finished card without having to cut them out. So that's it for me for this lesson. I hope you found that useful. If you like what you see, please come and subscribe to me on my channel, and see many other tutorials that I've got which go from beginner through to advanced, all sorts of colouring techniques and papercrafting techniques. Meanwhile, thanks for joining me and sticking with me on this lesson, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now. Bye.